A month ago, in fact exactly a month ago, on April 17th, I attended an interfaith breakfast. It was for clergy, and the topic was courageous clergy voices in the moral moment. And I don't know if you're aware that the word courage comes from heart. Coeur in French means heart. So the topic was about how clergy, and really any spiritual person, you don't have to be clergy, need to respond to the everyday world where there's sometimes conflict and strife. So there was a visiting rabbi from Chicago who's recently written a book, and she was saying that pretty much all religions and all scriptures say that the essence of every religion is love, which is a beautiful ideal. But I think most of us know when we're faced with people who argue with us, who are combative, who are defensive, we don't always really love them. Like, we might abstractly love them, but in terms of really loving them, that's a challenge. So that's what I want to talk about today is, as a spiritual person, what do we do in these everyday interactions that might not always be smooth and easy? And I know a lot of people say, well, just avoid talking about politics. You know, I've heard people at holiday times, Thanksgiving and whatever Christmas time holiday you celebrate, they say, don't talk about politics, don't talk about religion. And to me, that doesn't make sense, because just because you don't talk about it, it doesn't mean that your feelings go away. And anytime we try to leapfrog over something or hide something or avoid something that's kind of like a thorn, it doesn't only not go away, it gets worse. So I don't know if you've ever had some weird sound in your car and you don't really know what it is and you don't know too much about cars, and so you just crank up the radio so you don't hear it. That's not going to make the transmission go away. It's just going to get worse and worse until it's so loud that you have to. The same thing happens, you know, you have a pain in your knee or your hip or wherever, and so you pop a bunch of ibuprofen or aspirin or whatever your painkiller of choice is, and the pain doesn't go away, it gets muted, but it actually gets worse. And I really learned this lesson when I was in college. I was on this fantastic program. We were hiking in New Hampshire. There's a mountain called Mount Washington that has a reputation for being the place that the weather can change on a dime. So, you know, here we were, a bunch of college kids with these backpacks on. The weather was beautiful when we started out the hike, and then all of a sudden these clouds came in and the mist came over, and the teachers who were leading the hike, I could tell, were really panicked because they knew they had to get us, college students, down the mountain quickly before the storm rolled in. So I was not an experienced hiker, I was an English student. This was an English program. And so I'm racing down these rocky mountains with Vibram-soled shoes on, and I twisted my ankle. And I felt this sharp pain, but you know, I kept going down the mountain. And the rest of the time that I was on this trip, I noticed that when I turned my ankle in a certain direction, there was this really sharp pain. And so I just didn't turn my ankle in that direction. And I walked around on it for 3 months, just being aware not to turn my ankle in the direction that caused the pain, until one day I walked down the stairs and I twisted it again and I could hardly walk. So I got x-rays, I found out that I had torn a tendon. I found out the tendons heal more slowly than bones, ligaments, anything else. And so they put my foot in a cast up to the knee. When I got the cast off, I really couldn't walk because all the muscles had atrophied. So the blessing of all of this is that I went to a chiropractor for the first time at the age of, I think I was 19 or 20. And ever since then, I have had chiropractors as my medical professionals of choice. But the point of that is just avoiding the pain for 3 months did not heal my torn tendon. And the same thing is true in our relationships. When we have some kind of discord that we avoid and just don't talk about it, it doesn't heal the relationship. It actually creates more static. It's kind of like, I don't know if you feel this, but I feel kind of like an energy field between myself and the other person that gets worse and worse the more there's an avoidance. And I think as spiritual people, we have a duty to everyone in our lives to be a force for good and a force for healing, not a continued stimulus for avoidance of things that are difficult. So, what does it even mean to be spiritual? I think spiritual means that we recognize there is a power greater than our individual selves. You might call it God, you might call it spirit, you might call it force if you're a Star Wars fan, whatever you call it. It's a recognition that there is a divine source and that we are all related with this divine source. You know, some people talk about people as being children of God or offspring of a creator. And so if we all have this divine source and we all have divinity within us, as spiritual beings, I think that our duty is for the divinity in us to relate to the divinity in another person. That's what the greeting namaste means. If you've ever taken a yoga class, the teachers always end by saying namaste, which means the divinity in me salutes the divinity in you. And so one of the ways I think that we can practice that and really practice the essence of love is when we have somebody in our lives who doesn't agree with us, who has different opinions, is to really truly be curious to understand what their point of view is. Not, how could you think that? Or, what's wrong with you for thinking that way? But, tell me how you think about that. I mean, really, honestly, sincerely curious to find out where that person is coming from and what their viewpoint is. Maybe, how did you arrive at that conclusion? That's a great question, because usually people don't just come up with an opinion out of the blue. They've developed it because of something, either something they were taught, some experience they had, some research that they did. And so genuinely being curious to understand that person's point of view can help bring about a mutual understanding. To me, what happens when we're truly curious about other people and really want to understand their point of view, it brings about connection. And that's what spiritual relationships to me are all about, is that we connect with each other on the inside. You know, when people have opinions, those opinions are ideas, but beneath the opinions are feelings. And so if we don't want to hear someone's opinions, we're also saying, I don't want to hear your feelings. I'm just going to dismiss your feelings because I don't like them. You don't have a right to those feelings. And that's kind of mean. That's not a very loving way to treat someone. So when I attended this interfaith breakfast, I was sitting next to a woman. If you are here for the whole service, I asked for prayers. I had no idea she was 90 years old. I thought she was probably 80. She's been a very powerful force in the interfaith community. She ran interfaith dialogue groups in North County. She would bring in members of various religions to speak about the religion so that other people could understand that religion. And with all of her work in interfaith understanding, she actually won a Lifetime Achievement Award for her work. One of her children was very different politically, and it was a source of hurt for her heart that even with all of her understanding of interfaith dialogue, she was not able to bring about resolution with this son of hers. And so I don't know if they resolved it before she died suddenly of a heart attack or not. I hope they did. because clearly to her, bringing about understanding and healing was much more important than people defending their positions. I have thought about why people get so testy about politics. And I think that when people feel really strongly and have strong opinions, a lot of times it's because they feel powerless. And if you think about politics, politics is all about who is the person or who are the people in charge who are making decisions that affect my everyday life. And if I feel like I don't have any power over these decisions that are affecting my everyday life, then I feel powerless. And so I might strike out against whoever or whatever I think is controlling my life. And the truth is that when we can really understand each other, we also have a deeper way of understanding our own power. Because we each do have power to cause something. And so it might be on a one-to-one basis in our family, with our friend group, that we're able to bring about understanding in areas where we may not agree with each other, but to really understand, wow, I can tell that you feel really strongly about this, and tell me about those feelings. Inviting that person to share their feelings instead of just cutting them off, and filling up the space, trying to drown out their opinions with your own, to really allow space for other people is a way of acknowledging that they have an inner life too. And that, to me, is what being spiritual is all about, recognizing that we each have an inner life that in many ways is more real than the outer life, which is why I love that Kermit the Frog song, because it's all about that. It's about the invisible world, these voices that we hear. So my hope is that by listening to each other, by really caring for each other's souls and feelings, that we can help to heal whatever divides us. I don't think we're ever going to have a world where everybody agrees with each other. That would be not only boring, but not really possible. Think of, it's kind of like having a bunch of robots if everybody just thinks the same way. But I think that we can have differences and also have mutual understanding, and we actually grow through that. I really appreciate it. It's one of the things I always loved about teaching. When I had students who would ask me questions that I had never even thought about. And so instead of feeling insecure, like, oh my gosh, I don't know the answer to that, I liked having somebody ask me a question that helped me to consider things from a point of view that I had never even thought about that. It's like, wow, I never even thought about that. Let me think about it. And I think that's one of the beautiful things that can happen when we really communicate with people who look at the world through different eyes than we do. I think it's one of the reasons why people like to travel to other countries, because sometimes people in different cultures have a very different way of looking at life than we do. So one of my favorite people in the world is His Holiness the Dalai Lama. And I don't know if you know much about his life, but his family was wiped out, his religion was wiped out, everything that he grew up with was wiped out, and he became not only a spiritual leader, but also a leader for the Tibetan refugees. And if you look at his life, you might say he would be justified in being angry at the people who wiped out his civilization and religions and traditions. But he didn't. His whole Dharma is about compassion. And one thing he said is that if you can cultivate the right attitude, your enemies are your best spiritual teachers, because their presence provides you with the opportunity to enhance and develop tolerance, patience, and understanding. So you might consider that when you're angry or irritated with people whose viewpoints you don't agree with, it's not because they're blockheads, and it's not because there's something wrong with them. Maybe it's because you need to delve deeper inside of yourself to care for them as the divine beings that they are. Maybe it's an opportunity for your growth instead of you just trying to put them down or silence them. And something else that His Holiness said is, people take different roads seeking fulfillment and happiness. Just because they're not on your road doesn't mean they've gotten lost. So maybe, just maybe, we can learn from each other and expand our own way of thinking so that we learn to broaden our perspective to see a greater whole. Thank you.